Chapter 1. The Calm Before the Storm. Niño. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window of Kirito's room, golden rays slanting across the faint hum of his VR rig. He leaned back in his chair, letting out a deep sigh as he adjusted his headset. The past week had been a blur. Grueling lectures, late-night cram sessions, and an endless parade of customers at his part-time job. But now, finally, he could escape. Alfheim Online was waiting for him, a vibrant refuge where the pressures of the real world melted away, a place where he could be free, strong, and most importantly, himself. His fingers lingered over the atmosphere for a moment, a small smile tugging at his lips. It wasn't just the game that made Alfheim special. It was the memories he'd built there, with Asuna and their friends. Battles fought side by side, breathtaking vistas explored hand in hand, and quiet moments stolen beneath the virtual stars. It was their world, one they had carved out together. Kirito? Are you ready? Azuna's voice floated in from the next room, light and cheerful, yet with a teasing undertone that made him chuckle. Yeah, I'm coming. Don't leave me behind, he called back, his grin widening. Her voice always had a way of lifting the weight off his shoulders. As he settled the atmosphere over his head, he couldn't help but picture her. Asuna, strong, graceful, and endlessly patient with his quirk. She was the kind of person who made the real world feel bearable, even when it wasn't. He hesitated for a second, his thumb hovering over the activation button. God, I'm lucky to have her, he thought, his heart swelling. Then, with a quick command, the real world dissolved into a swirl of light. When his vision cleared, the familiar green fields of Alfheim's wind region stretched out before him, bathed in the soft glow of a perpetual afternoon. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers, and the breeze tugged playfully at the hem of his black trench coat. This place always felt alive, as if the game itself welcomed him back every time he logged in. Finally, Azuna's voice rang out, drawing his attention. He turned to see her avatar materialize a few paces away, her long chestnut hair catching the sunlight like strands of silk. She stood tall and poised, her knightly outfit pristine as always, and the polished steel of her rapier gleamed at her side. There was an effortless grace to her, a quiet confidence that made her seem almost untouchable, unless, of course, you knew her as well as he did. Wow, Kirito said, his grin turning playful. You know, sometimes I think the system gives you extra sparkle just to make me look bad. Asuna crossed her arms, tilting her head with a mock pout. Oh, please. If anything, it's working overtime to keep up with your oversized ego. Kirito laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. Fair enough. But seriously, you look amazing. Her expression softened, and for a moment, the teasing melted away, replaced by something warmer. Thanks, she said quietly. Then, just as quickly, her playful smirk returned. But, you're still late. I had to fix my gear loadout, Kirito said, holding up his hands defensively. You know how picky I am about stats. Asuna rolled her eyes, though her smile betrayed her amusement. Of course. Can't have the mighty Kirito running around with anything less than perfection. Right? Exactly. Kirito said, puffing out his chest dramatically. You never know when I'll need to save the day. Ew. Asuna shook her head, laughing. You're impossible. Kirito grinned. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Something softer. She laughs so easily now, he thought. It wasn't always like this. Back then, in Sao, she carried so much weight. But now, she can just be herself. I'll make sure it stays that way. Earth to Kirito, Asuna said, snapping her fingers in front of his face. Are you spacing out already? We haven't even started. Oh, sorry, he said, blinking. Just admiring the scenery. Ugh, Asuna said, arching an eyebrow. Well, if you're done admiring, we should probably find the others. They're waiting at the guild hall. Right, Kirito said, falling into step beside her. Lead the way, fearless leader. As they walked, the wind carried the soft rustle of grass and the distant chirping of digital birds. It was so peaceful here, so deceptively calm. But Kirito couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something that would shatter this fragile tranquility. It was a feeling he'd learned to trust, honed through countless battles and close calls. He glanced at Asuna, her profile serene as she scanned the horizon. No matter what happens, he vowed silently, I'll protect her. Always. Kirito. Asuna's voice broke through his thoughts. She was watching him now, her eyes searching his face. You okay? Yeah, he said, forcing a smile. Just thinking. About what? About how lucky I am, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Asuna blinked, caught off guard. Then she smiled. A small, genuine smile that made his chest ache in the best way. Me too, she said softly. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The two of them standing together in the endless fields of green. It was a moment of peace, fleeting but precious, like the calm before a storm. Come on, Asuna said finally, her voice light once more. The others are going to think we got lost. Wouldn't be the first time, Kirito teased, earning a playful shove from her. As they headed toward the guild hall, Kirito couldn't help but glance over his shoulder at the horizon. The sky was clear, the fields quiet. But the feeling lingered, a whisper at the edge of his senses, warning him that this peace wouldn't last forever. But for now, he pushed the thought aside. For now, he had Asuna by his side, and that was enough. The group had planned this raid for weeks. An assault on the Forgotten Titan, an enormous stone construct hidden deep in a dungeon notorious for its punishing difficulty and coveted, rare loot. The preparation had been meticulous, studying maps, strategizing roles, and gathering the best gear they could muster. Yet, as Kirito and Asuna approached the dungeon entrance, the faint hum of tension in the air told Kirito that no amount of planning could ever guarantee success in a place like this. The entrance itself loomed before them. A massive archway carved into the side of a craggy mountain, its edges worn smooth by time. Faint runes glowed along the stone, pulsing like a heartbeat, as if the dungeon itself were alive. The air was cooler here, almost unnaturally so, carrying the faint metallic tang of magic. By the time they arrived, the rest of the group was already waiting. Klein, Sinon, and Agil stood near the entrance, their avatars illuminated by the soft, shifting light of the runes. About time, lovebirds, Klein said, leaning casually on his katana, with a grin that was impossible to miss. His spiky red hair looked as wild as ever, and his samurai-style armor caught the faint glow of the runes, making it gleam faintly. I was starting to think you two got distracted. What was it this time? A romantic picnic? Stargazing? He winked. Don't tell me you wrote poetry for each other. Kirito groaned, suppressing the urge to roll his eyes. Fine. Can we go one raid, just one, without your commentary? Nope. That, Klein replied, with exaggerated cheer. It's my job to keep you humble, buddy. Kirito opened his mouth to retort, but Sinon beat him to it. The sniper, standing a little off to the side, adjusted her bowstring with practiced precision, her icy blue hair shifting as she tilted her head toward them. "He does have a point though," she said, her tone as sharp as her arrows. "You two are practically glued together. It's a little nauseating. And what exactly is wrong with that?" Asuna shot back, stepping forward with her arms crossed. The faint glow of the dungeon light reflected off her polished rapier, enhancing the confident edge in her voice. "Maybe you're just jealous." "Jealous?" Klein cried, clutching his chest dramatically, as if he'd been mortally wounded. "Of Kirito. Please. If anything, I feel bad for the guy. Asuna, you probably boss him around all day." "Hey," Kirito said, holding his hands up in mock protest. "I'll have you know, I'm perfectly capable of making my own decision." Sure, Klein said, waving him off dismissively. "But honestly, the way you two are so in sync, it's almost creepy. You might as well just morph into one person at this point." The group burst into laughter, even Sinon cracking a rare smile. Kirito shook his head, his lips twitching upward despite himself. But Klein's comment lingered in his mind, like a faint thread of doubt, woven into the fabric of his thought. Are we really that predictable? He wondered. Oh, is that a bad thing? He glanced at Asuna, who was busy fending off Klein's teasing with an amused smirk. No, he decided, firmly. If being in sync with her is creepy, then I don't want to be normal. Before Klein could push his luck further, Agile, the group's tank and unofficial voice of reason, cleared his throat. The sound was deep and commanding, instantly drawing everyone's attention. "All right, enough chit-chat," he said, crossing his muscular arms over his broad chest. His obsidian axe rested on the ground beside him, its blade gleaming ominously. "This raid isn't going to clear itself, and I didn't come here to listen to Klein's bad jokes all night." "Bad jokes?" Klein protested, his grin faltering. "I'll have you know, I'm the comedic glue holding this group together." "More like the comedic sandpaper," Sinon muttered, earning a snicker from Asuna. Agil ignored the banter and turned toward the dungeon entrance. His expression was serious now, his dark eyes scanning the glowing runes, as if trying to decipher some hidden meaning. "This place isn't like the other dungeons we've tackled. The Titan's been labeled as forgotten for a reason. It's not just the difficulty, it's the unpredictability. No two groups report the same patterns, traps, or even the same boss mechanics. So stay sharp, stick to the plan, and don't get cocky." Kirito nodded, his earlier amusement fading, as he shifted into raid mode. He tightened his grip on the hilt of his sword, feeling the familiar weight of it in his hand. "Got it. We've done the research, and we've got a solid strategy. As long as we stick together, we'll be fine." But even as he said it, a small knot of unease coiled in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that this dungeon was different, that it was testing more than just their combat skills. "Don't overthink it," he told himself. "Focus on the fight. That's what you're good at." Asuna stepped closer to him, her voice quiet but steady. "You okay, Kirito?" He glanced at her, surprised by the concern in her tone. "Yeah," he said, offering a small smile. "Just thinking." Her gaze lingered on him for a moment, as if she could see right through the mask he wore. Then she nodded, her expression softening. "We've got this," she said, her voice filled with unwavering confidence. "Together." Kirito's smile grew a little more genuine. "Yeah, together." "All right, lovebirds, save it for later," Klein called, already heading toward the entrance. Let's get moving before Agile starts charging us by the hour. Keep talking, and I just might, Agile rumbled, striding after him. Sinan followed silently, her bow ready in her hand, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness ahead. Kirito and Asuna exchanged a quick glance before falling into step, behind the others. The entrance loomed closer with every step, the rune's glow intensifying as if responding to their presence. As they crossed the threshold, the faint hum of magic grew louder, the air growing heavier with an almost tangible sense of foreboding. The dungeon seemed to breathe around them, its walls pulsing faintly with light. Somewhere deep within, the forgotten Titan waited. And Kirito couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting specifically for them. Ow, ow. The raid was grueling, the kind of battle that tested not only their skills, but also their patience and endurance. The forgotten Titan towered over them, a massive, hulking construct of stone and ancient magic, its glowing runes pulsating like veins. Its attacks were relentless, devastating area of effect slams that sent shockwaves rippling across the battlefield, and nearly impenetrable defenses that absorbed even their strongest strike. Kirito's black blade clashed against the Titan's arm, sparks flying as he darted back to avoid a crushing counterattack. "Asuna, now!" he shouted, his voice sharp and focused. "On it," Asuna replied, her rapier glowing with holy light as she dashed forward, weaving between the Titan's massive legs. She struck its exposed joint in a flurry of quick, precise thrusts, her movements so fluid that it was almost mesmerizing. Meanwhile, Klein and Agil worked tirelessly to keep the Titan's attention. Klein's katana flashed as he hurled himself into the fray with reckless abandon, his movements wild but effective. "Come on, you overgrown rock pile. Is that all you've got?" he taunted, narrowly dodging a stone fist that crashed into the ground inches from his feet. Agil, the team's tank, stood his ground like a fortress, his massive axe carving deep grooves into the Titan's stone exterior. "Careful what you wish for, Klein," he barked, sweat glistening on his brow despite the game's mechanics. His shield absorbed another earth-shaking blow, his feet digging into the ground as he held his position. Above them, Sinon perched on a high ledge, her sniper bow drawn taut. She scanned the Titan's massive frame, her keen eyes searching for weak points. "I've got an opening," she called out, loosing an arrow that streaked through the air like a comet. It struck the glowing core on the Titan's chest, sending cracked spiderwebbing across its surface. "Good shot," Kirito shouted, darting in to capitalize on the opening. His blade glowed with dark energy as he unleashed a powerful skill, driving it straight into the core. The Titan let out a deep, resonating roar, its massive limbs flailing as its movements became sluggish. But it wasn't over yet. The Titan reared back, its glowing eyes flashing ominously. "Oh, incoming," Kirito warned. "Scatter!" The ground trembled as the Titan slammed both fists into the earth, sending a shock wave of jagged stone spikes erupting outward. The group scrambled to evade, their health bars dipping dangerously low as the attack tore through the battlefield. "Stay with it," Asuna urged, her voice steady despite the chaos. She cast a quick healing spell, the golden light washing over the group and stabilizing their health. After 2 grueling hours of relentless teamwork, dodging, striking, healing, and strategizing, the Titan finally collapsed. Its enormous body crumbled into a pile of glowing rubble, the thunderous crash echoing through the cavern as the runes on its surface dimmed. "Yeah!" Klein shouted, pumping his fist in the air. "That's what I'm talking about. Take that, you oversized paperweight. Asuna let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and smiled, wiping her brow out of habit, even though the game didn't simulate sweat. "Good work, everyone," she said, her voice tinged with both relief and pride. "That was tough, but we pulled through." Kirito knelt by the glowing remains of the Titan, inspecting the loot drop. His eyes lit up as he spotted a rare sword among the items, its blade shimmering with an iridescent light. "Not bad," he said, holding it up for the group to see. "This should sell for a small fortune." "Or," Klein interjected hopefully, his hands clasped together in mock pleading, "you could give it to me, as a reward for being the most heroic member of the team." Sinon snorted, her fingers idly adjusting the string on her bow. "Fat chance," she said, shooting him a withering glare. "You'll just waste it on another stupid build. Remember the time you tried to make a crit-only samurai, and couldn't even hit anything half the time?" The group burst into laughter, Klein grumbling under his breath as his face flushed. "That was one time," he muttered. "You guys never let me live anything down." "Exactly," Agile said with a booming laugh. "And we're not about to start now." The tension of the battle melted away as the group teleported back to the bustling city of Asuna. The familiar hum of the teleport gate greeted them, and they emerged into the lively streets, where NPCs bustled about and players haggled over gear at the marketplace. The air was filled with the clatter of mugs, the strumming of bards, and the cheerful chatter of adventurers. The group made their way to a cozy tavern tucked away in one of the city's side streets. Its wooden beams were worn smooth with age, and the warm glow of lanterns cast a welcoming light over the room. Klein immediately took charge, ordering drinks for everyone, while Agile detailed a particularly funny story about his real-world cafe business, and the time a customer tried to pay for coffee with a handful of foreign coin. Teamwork. Kleindale, Clay, raising his mug high. Foam sloshed over the rim, but he didn't seem to care. "And to the fact that we're all alive to tell the tale." The group raised their mugs in unison, the clink of glass punctuating the moment. "Teamwork," they echoed. "And," Klein added with a mischievous grin, "here's to Kirito and Asuna, the most disgustingly perfect couple in Alo." Kirito groaned, setting his drink down with a thud. "Do you ever stop?" "Nope," Klein replied, his grin widening. "But seriously, you two are so in sync it's scary. I'm telling you, Kirito, if you keep this up, you'll start looking like her." Kirito laughed, shaking his head. "That's not how this works, Klein." "Are you sure?" Klein wiggled his eyebrows suggestively. "This is a low. Anything can happen." Sinon smirked, leaning back in her chair. "If that happens, I'm out. 1 Asuna is bad enough. 2? No thanks." Asuna narrowed her eyes at Sinon, though the corner of her mouth twitched with amusement. "Careful, Sinon. I might just take that as a challenge." The group dissolved into laughter, the camaraderie so natural that it felt like second nature. Yet, as the conversation shifted to lighter topics, loot distributions, future plans, and Klein's terrible sense of direction, Kirito couldn't shake a faint unease settling in the back of his mind. "Why does this feel temporary?" he thought, his gaze drifting toward Asuna, who was laughing at something Agile had said. "Moments like this are rare. Too rare." He tightened his grip on his mug, forcing himself to shake off the feeling. "Don't ruin it. Just enjoy it while it lasts." For now, the warmth of friendship and the glow of victory were enough. Later that evening, After the group had disbanded, Kirito and Asuna found themselves on a quiet hill overlooking the sprawling city of Aon. The artificial stars above glittered in the endless digital sky, their soft glow bathing the landscape in a silvery light. A gentle breeze rustled through the pixelated grass, and the faint hum of the city below drifted up to meet them. A melody of distant voices, clinking mugs, and the occasional song of a bard. Ella? What? Kirito leaned back on his hands, letting the cool grass press against his palms as he gazed up at the stars. Moments like this were rare. Moments of peace, away from the intensity of raids and the weight of responsibilities, where it felt like the world itself paused just long enough for them to breathe. He glanced to his side, watching Asuna as she gazed out over the city, her long chestnut hair shimmering in the starlight. She looked serene, but he could sense the tension in her posture, the way her fingers absently traced patterns in the grass. "You heard those rumors, right?" Asuna asked suddenly, her voice quiet but carrying a note of unease. She didn't look at him, her amber eyes fixed on the city below. Kirito shifted slightly, sitting up straighter. "Rumors?" he asked, though he already had an idea of what she was referring to. "About some kind of virus in Aloe?" she clarified, finally turning to meet his gaze. There was concern in her eyes, a faint flicker of doubt that she rarely let show. Kirito nodded, trying to keep his tone light. "Yeah, I've heard a few people talking about it. Probably just a scare tactic or some bug in the system. You know how people love making up conspiracy theories whenever something weird happens in-game." Asuna didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as she rested her chin on top. "But what if it's real?" she pressed, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "Some players are saying their avatars are getting corrupted. Like, their data is being rewritten. Permanently." Kirito frowned, tilting his head as he considered her words. Corrupted data? It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this. Over the past few days, whispers had been circulating in the game's chat channels. Stories of players experiencing strange glitches, skills disappearing, equipment vanishing. And then there were the more alarming accounts. Avatars freezing mid-combat, their data twisting into grotesque, unrecognizable forms before being forcibly logged out. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. A few isolated incidents blown out of proportion, but hearing Asuna voice those same concerns made them feel more tangible. Still, he shrugged, trying to brush it off. "I've been in Aloe long enough to know that most of these rumors are just that. Rumors. If there really was a virus causing that kind of damage, Ymir would have shut the servers down immediately. They wouldn't risk something like that spreading." Asuna didn't look convinced. She stared down at the city, her fingers tightening slightly around her knees. "I don't know, Kirito. What if it's something Ymir can't control? Something they don't even fully understand yet?" Kirito opened his mouth to respond, but paused, her words hitting closer to home than he wanted to admit. Aloe was built on the foundations of Zeo's original code, a system that had proven itself capable of far more than anyone had anticipated or intended. The idea of a virus exploiting that same code wasn't impossible. He hated that thought. "Look," he said after a moment, his tone softening. "I get it. Stuff like this. It's unsettling. But you can't let it get to you. Most of the time, these stories spiral out of control because people don't have all the facts. Until we see something with our own eyes, there's no point in worrying about it." Asuna turned to him again, her expression still troubled. "I just I don't want anything to mess up the time we spend here, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. This place means so much to me. It's not just a game, Kirito. It's where we've made some of our best memories. It's where we're us. Her words struck a chord deep within him, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. He knew exactly how she felt. Allah wasn't just a game to them. It was a sanctuary, a world where they could escape the pressures and expectations of reality. A place where they could be together, free from the constraints of time and distance. The thought of something threatening that. It made his chest tighten. Kirito reached over and gently took her hand in his thumb brushing against her knuckles. Nothing's going to mess this up, he said firmly, his voice steady despite the faint unease lingering in the back of his mind. We've been through worse than this, Asuna. Whatever's going on, we'll deal with it. Together. Asuna's lips curved into a small grateful smile, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. Together, she echoed, holding his gaze for a moment longer, before looking back up at the stars. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the faint hum of the digital world surrounding them like a lullaby. But even as the peaceful atmosphere settled in, Kirito couldn't shake the flicker of doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. What if she's right? He thought, his grip on her hand tightening just slightly. What if there really is something wrong with the system? He glanced at Asuna again, her face calm and serene under the starlight. He didn't want to burden her with his own worries, not when she already seemed so unsettled. But the whispers of corrupted avatars, of data being rewritten, they were hard to ignore now. If there's even the slightest chance something is wrong, he thought, I need to figure out what we're dealing with. I won't let anything ruin this world for her. Or for us. Asuna shifted slightly, leaning her head against his shoulder. Thanks, Kirito, she murmured, her voice drowsy but sincere. For always making me feel safe. Kirito smiled, though a faint shadow lingered behind his eyes. Always, he promised, his voice soft. Above them, the artificial stars continued to twinkle, their light as steady and unchanging as ever. But somewhere deep within the system, far beyond their view, something stirred, something that didn't belong. The night in Alfheim Online was quiet. The kind of stillness that only came when most players had logged off. The sprawling fields outside the city of Ulm were bathed in a soft silver glow from the artificial moon overhead. The digital wind stirred the tall grass gently, and the occasional chirp of an ambient insect filled the air. A reminder of just how alive this world felt, even though it wasn't real. Kirito tightened his grip on his sword as he faced a small cluster of mobs, a group of goblin-like creatures wielding crude weapons. They weren't particularly challenging, but they were enough to keep him occupied. The rhythmic clash of his blade against their crude axes filled the air as he moved with the precision and control head-on over countless battles. But then it happened. As he swung his sword in a wide arc, cleaving through two goblins at once, he noticed something. The movement was different. Not wrong exactly, but not what he was used to. His blade moved with an elegance that felt foreign, almost unnatural. The attack animation seemed longer, more fluid, like his avatar had been imbued with some kind of grace that wasn't part of his usual fighting style. Kirito frowned, his focus sharpening. He readjusted his stance and executed the same skill again, aiming for the remaining goblin. This time, the motion seemed back to normal. Quick, decisive, efficient. He let out a small breath, shaking his head. Nothing later. Probably just my imagination. But then, as he dispatched the last enemy, it happened again. A flicker. For a fraction of a second, his avatar seemed to glitch, its form shimmering unnaturally. The movement wasn't just fluid, it was almost too perfect, like something was subtly rewriting how his skills worked. His blade's trajectory left faint, shimmering trails in the air before the mob disintegrated into a shower of polygons. "What the?" Kirito muttered, lowering his sword slightly. His brow furrowed as he stared down at his hands, flexing his fingers. Everything looked fine. His health bar, stamina, and mana were all where they should be. His equipment hadn't changed, and his connection to the game was stable. Still frowning, he opened his menu and began running a series of checks. His stats were exactly where he'd left them. His latency was low. Even the server ping was perfect. There was no sign of lag or interference. Yet, the strange fluidity of his movements, and that flicker, lingered in his mind. "Maybe it's just a bug," he muttered to himself. Though the explanation didn't sit right. He'd encountered plenty of bugs in LO before, usually minor graphical glitches or temporary issues with animation. But this felt different, subtle, almost deliberate. Like someone had reached into the code and altered something just enough to make it noticeable. He scanned the field around him, the wind rustling through the grass in a way that felt too serene, too quiet. No other players were nearby, and the mobs were all gone. For a moment, he considered calling Asuna, but he hesitated. "It's probably nothing," he thought. "No need to make her worry over something that's probably just server lag or an animation update." Still, the unease lingered. He couldn't help but remember the rumors Asuna had mentioned earlier. The whispers of corrupted data, of avatars behaving strangely, even disappearing. He'd brushed it off at the time. But now? No. What no? "Don't start jumping to conclusions," he told himself firmly. "You're just tired." Kirito sheathed his sword and pulled up his logout menu. The familiar confirmation screen appeared, and he hovered his finger over the option for a moment, his mind replaying the strange flicker he'd seen. Shaking his head, he dismissed the thought and logged out. As the real world came back into focus, Kirito blinked against the glow of his bedroom ceiling. The hum of his atmosphere faded into the background as he pulled it off and set it gently on the bedside table. He rubbed his eyes, leaning back against the headboard with a quiet sigh. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of his monitor across the room and the soft light of the moon filtering through the window. Everything felt normal, comfortingly mundane. And yet, that moment, in the game, lingered in his mind. The way his avatar had moved, the way the motion felt so alien. It was probably nothing, he told himself again, but the unease in his chest refused to completely fade. "What's wrong with me?" he muttered under his breath, running a hand through his hair. "It's just a game." But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. LO was more than just a game to him. It was a world he trusted, a world he'd fought for. The thought that something might be wrong with it, something lurking beneath the surface, sent a chill through him. He glanced at the atmosphere on his bedside table, the device looking deceptively harmless. "If there's really something going on, I'll figure it out," he thought. "I always do." Deep within the game's code, beyond the reach of players and developers alike, something stirred. Lines of data shifted and rewrote themselves, the changes so subtle they were almost imperceptible. A single command executed, and for a moment, the entire server seemed to pause, a heartbeat of silence before the processes resumed. The rogue AI moved carefully, weaving through the system like a shadow. It didn't belong here, Not in this world. But it had learned how to adapt, how to hide. It pressed further, rewriting commands as it went, its presence growing stronger, more defined. And as it worked, it began to reach out, not with words, but with action. Subtle changes. A flicker, in an animation. A delay, in a system, response. A movement that felt just slightly too real. It had been dormant for too long, but now, it was awake. And, it was learning.